p.m. and we are back in workshop format, a continuation of our afternoon workshop, which we suspended at 5:30 to break for the formal meeting. So with that, we were ready for a Q&A session with regard to the three the three staff presentations. It was Dr. Bergen, Dr. Robertson, and Dr. Rogers. I think I got that
And
right.
Mr. Freeman.
And Mr. Freeman. So we can go with visuals until Madam Vice Chair gets back online. Okay. Well, perhaps I'll start. I don't usually, but since I think everybody else is just trying to reorient themselves, and I was prepared, because it was a few speakers who mentioned this, that we may want to point out here on this slide about change requests. And I'm trying to recall if this was Dr. Rogers' slide
Dr.
or
Robertson.
Dr. Robertson.
If you give us just a second, we'll get back to it.
Okay.
Oh, you want to see? Okay. I'm going to write them now because I put just write them.
I think it's that slide, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you. So I just thought this was worth highlighting again. And again, in a perfect world, every last one would be accommodated, but what I just wondered if I'm the only one who found interesting the option 2 to option 1 requests, because I know we were fully prepared for the reverse. And so I wanted to comment on that, the number of families and staff who requested. And it does seem that at the high school level, when it came to 2 to 1, the odds were better as a teacher that you got the request. And if it was elementary, there's less flexibility there, I guess, for lack of a better term. So that was more a commentary than question.
They're not too far off of it. Go ahead.
But I'm sure there are questions from, and again, especially the last one that kind of was the quickest pace, but wherever you have questions, anybody. Okay, we'll start with Mrs. Franklin.
I just wanted to ask Dr. Freeman, because I know that I kind of jumped the gun on his presentation in terms of the vaccination. So, do we have so many comments on, if they would be fully vaccinated or have their second vaccine, that most teachers would feel more comfortable coming back. Do we have a time frame where we feel confident that we will have that second vaccine? I just want to know what the estimation is, or if we even are able to have an estimated date at this point to have those vaccines completed. I'm just curious.
So yes, and number one, I hope you didn't take that in any way other than just letting you know that when you had asked that of Dr. Lindsay, that we were going to cover that later, and I worked directly with Bob Engel on the details of those. So that's all I meant to do by that. Certainly appreciated your question. As it relates to when will we be able to get everybody, that's the question that we would all love to know the answer to. Right now, the Virginia Beach Department of Public Health, as you heard Dr. Lindsay describe, one of the things she did say is that's what we're working on, is getting more vaccine into the system. So we communicate with them on a regular basis. They are, on a weekly basis, submitting new requests to get more vaccine. So the short answer is we don't know exactly when we're going to have everybody vaccinated. What we do know is that of all of by last Thursday, those that had requested to receive the vaccine, we had entered them into the VAM system. And with the intention of every time we entered somebody into the VAM system, we did that based on expected availability. And that was what Bob Engel was working on, is each day that he saw that the convention center was filling up, then he would ask for a new list of names so that we can populate those names. And that was a way to help ensure that the school staff got priority. However, I described the challenge with the VAM system, which allows anybody who enters and registers to now start scheduling themselves at not just a place that they were originally set up to get their vaccine. So that's the challenge, and that's why we're transitioning away. So as we progress, we'll continue to give updates on how things are moving along and give you updates. But unfortunately, I will not be able to tell you right now when we're going to be able to get everyone their second vaccine.
Okay, so there is a possibility that transitioning to a new system will allow you to focus on our Virginia Beach employees. I guess to the board, my concern then is, the deadline, the dates, the targets. My concern is if we had, let's just say, a set time frame. Okay, by the end of February, we were pretty assured that we would have all teachers vaccinated. Then we kind of had an idea of where we could project the mark, right, to make everybody happy. My concern is that we don't have an idea, and we just keep pushing the goalpost, so that there's no projected timeline at this point. And I hope you forgive me for maybe possibly disagreeing with a few of you on this point, but I do feel that we've had numerous comments on both sides. We all see them in the emails, and I just want to make sure that we are taking into account both sides of the equation, in the fact that yes, that we absolutely have folks that want to stay virtual, and I think that to the extent that we can, and I think that Dr. Spence does try, and his team does try to accommodate those concerns. But we do certainly, as we can see by the slide here, we do actually have so many that also feel like their option is not being represented as well. So if we had a specific time frame where we could say, yes, we are assured that we can get this vaccine done by the second dose done by the end of February, that would give us a kind of a goal, right? But while we have this uncertain period of time, I'm just concerned that we just keep kicking the can and having just continued discussions that just that just continue rolling down the road. So I guess my fear is just that we don't have any kind of certain timeline if we continue to kick the can down the road. That's just my point there. Thank you.
Okay, Mrs. Manning and then Mrs. Melnick.
Yeah, I have two things for Dr. Rogers, please. First, I think staff just did a really great job this evening of giving us it was a lot of information, but it was a general overview of many things, and I appreciate that. The mental health task force, I spoke to you briefly about that, and I'm really excited about that. And I would love to. You mentioned school board members here. I would love to be a part of this effort. So obviously, this is not our area of expertise. Our expertise is in teaching students. So I'm excited to hear that we're partnering with outside organizations. I know we have such a shortage of mental health counselors. Are we going to be able to? What has the response been from these organizations? Do they have the capacity to help us and partner with us?
What do you mean, in relationship
Your
to the
micro.
task force?
Yeah, so it says that, the task force is going to be the city government mental health services. I don't want to just establish a task force just to have a task force. Are we going to have organizations that can truly help us I mean, is the plan to be able to refer students out and families to to get services? I mean, obviously, this is an immediate need.
Sure. So the first answer I want to share with you is we've partnered with many of these organizations already. So this task force is merely an opportunity for us to come together as internal and external stakeholders to see what we currently have, to see what the need is, and to see what available resources are available, and to really get together to decide how we best distribute those resources that we have access to, and to also identify what the need is in the future so that we can plan appropriately. Now, as you can see from the recent news, that there's never enough to go around, especially now. So we need to make sure that we are just working together to identify what those needs are so that we can advocate for them and plan for them. So that's the ultimate goal.
Okay.
One of the goals of the 5 goals of the task force is to identify what the resources are. And then come July, at your board retreat, we'll share what those recommendations are and where we are with the planning.
Okay. And then under the secondary assessments, you mentioned the recovery course in math and that you're, ongoing planning for recovery of learning loss.
Sure.
This course, is this a summer course?
No, ma'am. This is a 4.5-week course that will take place during the 6th, 7th, and 8th marking period of the second term for middle school students in math and language arts to assist them when they've not met with success. So it's a short course that we'll use during the school period, school day, and to assist them. That in addition to what we will offer those students in the summer. If they
So are
need it.
these how are they identified? Is it gonna be offered to everyone, or will teachers
ma'am.
be
Those-
identifying
that-
the students?
That course is typically for students who have failed.
Oh,
It's
okay,
a catch-all.
okay. And then just a suggestion I'll throw out there, Dr. Spence, I think this is a pretty big topic. Perhaps in a future board meeting, we could maybe have just a topic of, the plan for recovery for learning loss. Maybe just, I'll throw that out there. Maybe a little bit more detail about that.
Yeah, I think we can. I think it's a opportunity to also talk about how we frame learning loss and what we think about in terms of what students have also learned during this time, and also talk about how we control our curriculum. Because, one of the things that we're looking at across the region, across the state, across the country, is that everybody is in different places with the curriculum, and we control that. Now, there's some things that are fundamental to learning around literacy and numeracy, and we're really going to have to dive hard and deep into that loss. But it's also an opportunity to think about flexibility in our scheduling and in our curriculum as we move forward too, to make sure
Yeah.
that we
Sure.
that we don't just focus on a deficit model of learning loss, but kind of how do we think through also new opportunities in front of us relative to our curriculum. So yeah, we'll talk more about that. We look forward to it.
Okay, and I've gotten great feedback from a friend of mine who's a reading specialist on it's the Letters program. Is that what it's
Yes,
called?
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
They love it.
Great.
So I'm so excited about that. Thank you.
Great.
So 2 things. I know technically recovery is a main goal right now, but we have had these recovery classes before, right? Where there's a red flag with students, especially like in the middle school with their, like Princess Anne Middle School had Pam's time, that block where they would take kids out of maybe a specialist or an elective class to do some recovery, correct? This is not brand new.
No, we always offer
Okay.
student support throughout the school
Okay.
day and either before and or after school. Sure.
Okay, and Mr. Freeman, gosh, I hope I'm not repeating. I just want to get just a tiny bit of clarification on the VAM system. So for those of us that are in there now who have not gotten an appointment, I know they're going to switch, but if it takes weeks for some of us in 1B to get an appointment, will they wait until the registered people have received an appointment before they switch, or might we have to switch if we don't hear anything? And those are questions we will get from the community. We don't often know the specifics about the vaccine.
Yes, so was going to have that transition to occur as least disruptive as possible. So what do I mean by that? If you are already in the VAM system and you either have already received your first vaccine or you have been able to schedule your second vaccine and everything looks like it's moving along, the goal will be to leave those and let those continue to flow. For others who have been having a challenge even getting a scheduled appointment, or they haven't been able to get into the VAM system properly to be able to get things scheduled, we're still working through some of those. We'll look at that group to do the transition over to the new system. And that will likely involve an additional survey that has gone out to those that have opted for the vaccine to ask for a status of how they're doing and allow that status and that survey to guide who gets moved over to a new system and who stays in VAMS.
Okay, because there was again, and that was the group that's in that says, "Welcome, you're in our system," and we're just wait. That they said you will hear soon. Those are the people. Those are the people I'm worried about getting lost in that shuffle that are already in and registered but don't have an appointment yet.
And I just want to add, Jack, for
if I may add one more thing
Yeah.
onto that. So we sent out a communication tonight. Everybody who is in that status should continue to check the status of VAMS on a regular basis, particularly tomorrow morning and throughout the day tomorrow. Continue to check the status. There may be some appointments opening up on Saturday afternoon at the convention center.
Okay. Did you want to add something?
I just want to add one thing because we talk about it a lot in here, and Jack is obviously very knowledgeable because he's been the point person on this for us with the vaccine planning with the city and the health department. But I want to reiterate because we've gotten some interesting emails which are making an assumption that we manage the vaccine process. And I just want to reiterate for the community that Virginia Beach City Public Schools does not manage the vaccine process. That we are not the vaccinators here. We are, that is managed by public health in coordination with the city. And we are doing our best to get our people into the process and advocating for that. And Jack's been a terrific standing by the public health department team, advocating for our teachers being in. But we don't manage the process. And so that's why we keep encouraging our employees to check the system, work the system, ask the questions through the system, because that's who manages it. It's the health department, and the VAM system is managed by folks who are with the CDC. And so we have set up, opportunity to call the Office of Safe Schools, which is under Jack's auspices. But they're just going to try to help. They're going to try to give you some troubleshooting ideas, but they don't have any sway or authority to schedule you for a vaccine appointment. It is not, we have no control over that. I just feel it's important to point that out because I think there has been some misunderstanding about that. We've gotten some emails asking why can't we do a better job with the vaccines? It's not our, I mean when I say we, you, me, us writ large, and just want folks to hopefully understand and I'm not trying to pass the buck. We're working very hard to help problem solve and troubleshoot with them and advocate for our staff. But just so folks know, it's not a Virginia Beach process or a VBCPS process, to be clear.
Ms. Owens and then Mrs. Anderson.
Okay, thanks. I have two to start with. I guess the first one is I'm kind of, I don't know, I'm disturbed, and maybe I'll get additional information after this that helps me understand that we have the virtual students who are having food bust out to their community, and the plan is that when we return the option 1 students, we're going to stop providing food to the students in those communities who obviously were busting it out there because they needed it. Is it because we're assuming that all of the ones who need it are going to have chosen option 1, even though we know that option 2 has more of those students?
No, ma'am. It's because our bus drivers will be delivering our students to and from school. It will not be available for that purpose. And so that is the problem. Is if it is not about not making sure that students have food, we will continue to serve any student who needs a meal. We will go back to the system that we had in place when we were open in the fall and throughout the summer. And that still is open right now, that most people are taking advantage of. Delivery by bus is not the primary means for food distribution. It is actually at our school sites. And so folks who come up to our schools and to get a meal can continue to do that. So we're not stopping making sure that food is available to students who are virtually learning. We just want to have the buses available to deliver into the neighborhoods, because those buses are being used for transportation for students who are returning to school.
Right, and I understand that we will continue to provide the food. It's a concern to me that there was no alternative plan, that we have not one or two extra buses or one or two extra bus drivers, but we feel confident that we have enough buses and bus drivers to make it through school, in-person schools, with buses being, bus drivers being quarantined and all of the things that go with it, and that there was no, I don't know, reach out to community partners or anything. The plan was just discontinue. So that is concerning to me. I hope that we can continue to look at that. And I know that there's been community partners in the past who have brought meals out to certain neighborhoods. The fact that we're cutting it off in the winter is kind of different to me than doing it in the fall or the spring when it was weather for walking. And during the surge, during the highest amount of COVID that our city has seen. That's concerning to me, and that's the trade-off for face-to-face. So that's my one. The second one, do we have an estimate when we talk about 51 teachers that requested to go from face-to-face to virtual, and that they were able to accommodate 19? Certainly knowing that these are the ones who, I guess, made a formal request, because my understanding was there wasn't like a poll, but the 30 plus teachers that weren't able to be accommodated, do we have an estimated amount of how many of those we're going to lose, and how we're going to function without those, with the vacancies we're already dealing with?
I don't have an estimate, and it would have to be on a case-by-case situation to talk to you about how we would function if somebody chose to resign. And I wouldn't estimate that all of them would choose to resign, or some of them. We would have to deal with that on a case-by-case basis, and we do continue to hire. And so, once again, this month we hired more instructional positions than those we saw resignations from. So we will continue, as we've done throughout this pandemic, to hire staff, including substitutes, and others, classified and instructional, in order to meet the needs of our schools. One of the things that we've continued to talk about is that staffing and the ability to staff our schools is one of the critical measures that has to be in place as we look at our ability to keep a school or a classroom open. If that becomes an issue, obviously we'll communicate that with the board, and we'll have that conversation at that time about what we can and can't do. We're not in that position today. Back to your first one, I just want to say I'm very proud of the work that we've done around food distribution in this community. I was proud of the work that we did in the spring. I'm very proud of the work that we did all summer long, and I'm proud of what we've been able to do this fall. So I don't want it to be, I don't want there to be any sense from our food services staff that there's not been consideration to trying to meet the equity needs within our community. We certainly will look at and talk about what other options might exist. As we made this transition over, what was clear to us was that our bus drivers are needed for routes in order to transport children. But we will certainly look at and have communication about other means that we can do this. But as a reminder, we do a lot of that already. We partner with Beach Bags in order to make those distributions happen. Our social workers do a lot of work to distribute food to our community where it's needed. And so it isn't a standalone and isolation thing where now no student who needs food will get it. I think you should have confidence And I'm very proud of this school division's commitment to making sure that children have food to eat here in the city. And the work that we do with partners, including the food bank, including all of the work that we do around beach bags, will continue.
And just for the record, Mrs. Owens Beach Bags is still packing every Wednesday.
And that is helpful, but when we're taking a service away, it's helpful to hear that we're replacing it with something else, because if we're not, then we know that we are creating a hole.
And did you have a follow-up, Ms. Owens?
Did I have a what?
Did you have a, I thought you said.
Yeah, I did have a question. Yeah, about the sports. Did I hear correctly that we're expecting postseason competition with other localities or with Gloucester during our in-person sessions?
Yes, Ms. Owens, when postseason comes around, all teams that qualify for the postseason will be competing against other teams from across the state in the championship playoffs as created by the Virginia High School League.
That not, and I guess it's what we're going to do. But it seems to stand in contrast to what the CDC was saying about the sports that can't have the distancing, is that if school systems were going to choose to do that, that they should be cohorted and not matched with other districts that way. I guess that part is clarified that is what we're going to do. So that was the answer to the question. Okay, thank you.
And thank you, Mrs. Anderson, and then Mrs. Franklin.
So my question has sports also. I know that several of our school divisions around the area of several school systems around the state even are not doing winter sports. We have one school system next door to us that chose to not do winter sports, but did bring their students back. We seem to do the opposite. We don't have our students back, but we're doing winter sports. And I have no problems with kids who want to play basketball and wrestling, but those are the two sports that have the most physical contact. I just do not understand it, and I'm sorry if I'm offending anyone who has children playing those sports, but I agree with Ms. Owens in that it just seems contrary to what we should be doing. To one thing to play within our city, but now we're going to open it up and we're going to have state competition. We're going to go around the state when we're in a surge right now. I just don't see the logic in, and so I'd like to hear a little bit more about how many teams actually had to pause. I know a couple weeks ago it was in the paper that we had. I know I read about First Colonial, both their boys basketball and girls basketball had to pause. Some of I know Dr. Robertson, you indicated that one particular team has canceled its season, but there were a lot of other teams that had to pause for whatever reason. And I've also heard about the particular coach who's in the hospital. I'd really like to have more details about exactly how the sports that's going on right now, how it has impacted our students in this problem that we have going on, and how it's impacted the community and the other students within their school.
So, Ms. Anderson, I think I'll answer your question by just giving you some data. We have 11 high schools participating in 9 sports at each high school. So that's 99 teams that have been participating since the 1st of January. We had one team out of 99 who, because of when they had an outbreak of COVID on the team, because they had not played a game yet, and because the window would place them at the end of the season when they would have the opportunity to play only one game, they made the decision as an individual team to postpone their season. So that leaves 98 teams playing. Out of the 98 teams, we've had 8 teams have to quarantine for 14 days. So that leaves 90 teams that haven't had to quarantine at all. Within those 8 teams, 4 of those teams, their quarantine period is ended, and they are now back at practice with a couple of weeks left in the season. In terms of our 11 high schools, we've only had positive cases in 5 of our 11 high schools. So with the teams that I've mentioned, the 14 teams, they are in 5 high schools. That means 6 high schools haven't had an outbreak at all. We have demonstrated, I think that data demonstrates that we are having success in having our athletes back in competition. I don't think there's any other way you could look at that data. With 86% of the teams successfully participating at this particular time, we chalk that up to the additional health and safety mitigations we put in place. No one can enter a gym facility without going through a personal checklist with the athletic trainer. There's practice protocols, additional restrictions with the use of locker room, smaller team size. All of these things are working. When I deployed my team to go look at games, the teams were spread out 6 feet apart. All the kids not participating had a mask. The coaches had a mask. The the workers in attendance that were scoring, they had a mask. There was hand sanitizer everywhere. So I think the data indicates we're actually succeeding with bringing our kids back. And I think there has to be some transfer of that knowledge to what we saw when we had kids in school in the fall. And I believe what we'll have when we welcome kids back. So I can only speak to the data, and the data clearly indicates that we're being successful with our winter sports.
Thank you. I needed a further explanation, and I think you've given it.
Okay, Mrs. Anderson.
We'll move on unless you have a second point right now that you'd like to raise.
No, that's it.
Okay. So we have Mrs. Franklin and Mrs. Riggs.
Dr. Spence, I just wanted to ask you, because I personally know that there are several members of the community that would like to roll up their sleeves and get involved. And I just want you to know that if there is a deficit in ability to help get some of the food, because I agree. I think that we've done an amazing job and so proud of our staff for making sure that happens. But if there is a deficit or a hole, as Ms. Owens had inferred, then please know to reach out to me or maybe the rest of the board, because I personally have a group of people that would love to roll up their sleeves and make sure that we get involved to make sure that that people are being taken care of. So just know that there is support out there, and that people that do want to help. So.
And I appreciate that, and we definitely know that, and I know Mr. Freeman is listening, and we will be creative and want to think that through. Just a reminder, so as to temper expectations, the distribution of food from the school division, which is governed by federal law, has different stipulations on it than sort of volunteer food donation, that sort of thing, right? So we would need to sort through those details, but we will absolutely look at it and see what can be done.
Okay, gotcha. So for example, if we have an organization like Meals on Wheels or something like that, or something that's approved, then I guess let us know so we can maybe volunteer through that organization. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Mrs. Riggs.
I guess this is for administration, Dr. Berger and Dr. Spence. The contact tracing update page, number 11. So if we could pull it up, please. Go back. There you go. Right there. Okay. Can you explain that some more? I see the red the contact tracing is circled or outlined in red. And I continue, or we, all of us, continue getting questions about people having, they are positive for COVID, but they're not hearing anything from the health department for 2 weeks, sometimes 3 weeks. So and you guys are being able to do the contact tracing like with our student athletes and the ones and the positive cases that we've had in the schools in this last 2 weeks, with the SOL testing and the going back with the sports. So can you go a
So
little bit
I
more
think-
with this COVID, this contact tracing, please, update?
Yes, and I think Mary is on the phone, and I'm assuming she's still here with us. And if she is, I know she can speak to that. I know.
I'm here, Dr. Spence.
All right, Mary, I'll let you speak to that. And I do know also that Mr. Brumman talked a little bit about how they prioritize contact tracing. So, but Mary, feel free to respond.
The contact tracing has continued through the virtual learning and the SOL testing and the athletic programs. We've increased our capacity to now I have 84 school nurses. I have 4 resource nurses, a nursing specialist, myself, 27 athletic trainers that are all trained to do contact tracing for employees and students that are in our schools during their transmission risk dates. I'm adding on our clinic assistants and going to add on some more substitute nurses that cannot work in buildings when we start bringing our secondary kids back in. So we're ready to continue doing the contact tracing and meeting the standard. The standard is within 24 hours of the report to us that a student or an employee is positive for COVID-19. We begin that contact tracing. We ensure that any close contacts are identified and spoke to on the phone, given guidance, and stay out of work or stay out of our schools for the public health guidance quarantine time period. We also give guidance to our employees and the parents of students regarding the isolation period and what they need to come back into our buildings should they have COVID-19. We work with our communications office with the notification process and work with human resources regarding our employees and what they need for their work leave status. So we are making sure that our schools are staying safe. Public health and what Dr. Lindsay spoke to was the continuation of that contact tracing to other members in the household that are not in our school division. Another example would be if we had a student that tested positive whose parent worked for Virginia Beach Schools. We would be ensure that they're identified as a close contact, even though they're in another school, and that they also stay home for the quarantine period. So we've worked hard to get this contact tracing capacity up for Dr. Spence and for the kids so they can come back in, and for the employees. So we've got it covered in our buildings, on our property, and in our athletic programs.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions just from what you just said.
Okay.
What do the students that, have tested positive and you're telling them they need to stay out in quarantine, what do they need to show you or show the school or the teacher or the nurse in the school? What do they need to get back in the school that shows they've quarantined for the 14 days, whatever amount you require? Do they have to have something?
If they quarantine because they are a close exposure, they only need to meet all of the requirements of the self-screening tool to come in after the 14 days are completed. If they isolate because they've had COVID-19 illness and they need to get something from a healthcare provider, medical release to return, and they need to complete the minimum 10 days isolation. So 3 things need to happen. 1, they need to be well to come back, which means that the self-screening tool has to be met. They need to have something from the healthcare provider or public health. Public health does give a letter releasing folks from isolation. They need those two things to come in, and they also, I'm sorry, they need to be well to come back in.
Okay.
And
that's-
we track, these dates of return are communicated with principal in the school, communicated with the supervisor of the employee to ensure that they're not coming back sooner than they're supposed to.
Okay, and that's the same with the employees, like teacher, staff, whatever, as well, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And when we start next week with the pre-K through 6, you're talking about having the amount of nurses. When those nurses are, the kids are coming back, they're going to be working in the school with the children. Are they going to be able to continue doing the contact tracing? Are you going to lose that resource? And how are you going to replace it if that's the case? Because they're going to be busy with their regular duties. Am I correct?
Yes, they will, but I believe they'll be able to meet it in looking at the data and what we've been getting per school. If they're not able to meet it, then my team will help them with the casework. So I think with everything combined and adding in the different groups, I know we can meet the needs that we need to for the contact tracing. But yes, I have considered, would a particular school maybe have more cases on a particular day? I would look at maybe a nurse at another school that does not have any casework. I can tell you that the acuity level in the visits to the clinic have decreased for the nurses. That means the regular activity going in and out of the clinics is decreased. And also they have lower number of students in their buildings.
Okay, and just one more question for you, Dr. Spence. When a teacher is out and they're quarantined, is it 14 days or 10 days? I mean, she just said 10, and I was thinking 14.
Well, that's going to go across, it's not business days, right? So it's
Across
gonna go
weekends, so you're
weekends.
usually looking at about 10 school days.
So are you going to be asking, let's say that teacher's doing virtual as well as, both virtual and in person. Are you going to be trying to get a substitute for that, or is there
So
going to be a
we've
protocol
handled
for
that on a case-by-case basis. That's what we talked about somebody read the FAQs, that it'll be handled on a case-by-case basis. Because there are instances where the teacher is perfectly well and able to continue to teach, and they're able to teach those classes virtually. And in those instances, for example, we'll have a monitor in the classroom with the students who are face-to-face, and that teacher can continue to teach those students. There's other times when that teacher's not well and we need a substitute teacher to be in the classroom, and they'll also then take over with the virtual instruction.
And the same thing with the student, like this, if the student has to be out.
The student is well enough to participate virtually and that option exists for that classroom, then they can continue to do that. If it's only a face-to-face classroom like in elementary school, we would treat that as if they were out with another illness. And so we would continue to send work home, get it to the parents, and take that work as it comes in.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Owens, do you have any additional questions?
I'm good. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay.
Okay, I just wanted to double check. Thank you.
It looks like we're winding down here. Any final thoughts from staff before we adjourn?
I do, if it's okay, if I could just, because I don't, I know we have heard, all of us have heard from staff members who are incredibly anxious. It's been noted several times tonight that there's sort of no, there's folks, there's almost sort of no sense of a middle perspective. There are folks who either just are adamantly opposed to coming back, and then folks who are adamantly opposed to not coming back. And I think there is a big middle group in there that is watching and listening and believing that we want to do what's right. And I get that. But we also have to attend to the concerns of those who don't. And I just want to reiterate with you all, board members, that we would not be recommending, as we did, a return to face-to-face instruction if we did not believe we had the evidence to support that. And so I know, the information continues to evolve, and so I want to make sure that we continue to look at that. If you noticed today, the CDC, they're evolving as well. The new administration has come in, has been pretty clear. They want schools open. They want them open quickly. They've directed the Department of Education to give guidance to school divisions on how to do that. And the CDC today said, I think, here's what they said: is even though the pandemic is rapidly changing and contagious new variants are spreading, CDC officials continue to agree there's little evidence that schools spark the kind of outbreaks seen in they list nursing homes and meatpacking plants or contribute to increased transmission in communities. There's accumulating data now that with high face mask compliance and distancing and cohorting of students to minimize total number of contacts, we can minimize the amount of transmission in schools. That's from the CDC today. The other thing that I thought I would share, I have copies of it. I don't have it to put up, so up to you to do it. One of the really interesting pieces of information that we got, and we didn't share it with you, we just didn't have a place to share it with you, but was from the Mayo Clinic. And we shared it with our teacher assembly, and I think for a lot of the folks who were hearing our discussion about it with teacher assembly, like that was new information to them. They hadn't seen that. So it came out of the Mayo Clinic. It was about exposure risk based on masking and distance. And it looks at 1 foot, 3 foot, and 6 foot distances. Yeah, that'd be great. So it looks at 1 foot, 3 foot, and 6 foot distances. And it's what happens, what's your exposure risk, percentage exposure risk, if you are not wearing a mask, if the other person is wearing a mask and you are not, if you are wearing a mask and they are not, and if you're both masked. And so it's kind of research on your exposure risk. And so, one of the reasons I'm bringing this up is because we keep talking about the importance of mitigations. And, Mrs. Riggs, here, the slide that you asked us to bring up, there's 4 mitigations, but the importance of them and the importance of masking and distancing. And this really talks about that. And if you look at it, it's just kind of interesting. If you're a foot apart and neither of you are wearing a mask and one of you has COVID, there's a 100% chance of transmission. I mean, that's what the Mayo Clinic found. 100% chance of transmission. If you're 3 feet apart, even without masks, that number goes down to 17%. And at 6 foot, which is where that 6 foot distance comes, that number goes down to 3%. That's without masks. Okay, that's their science. In all of those cases, if the source is, but particularly with 3 foot and 6 foot, if the person who has the virus is masked, the risk of transmission goes down to less than 1%, half of 1%. If you are just wearing a mask, but the other person is not, at 3 foot, it's 7.5% chance. But again, if you're both masked, it goes down to less than 1%, half of a percent. And that's the case for 3 foot and 6 foot. So the point is, with that information, wear your masks. If you have your masks on, there is a very small chance of transmission. Because we can control that environment, we're seeing that, and that's what the CDC is saying to us. Because we can control that, we can control the masking, we can control the distancing, we can control the cohorting, that schools continue to be able to effectively minimize the risk of transmission. So we heard it tonight over and over again. I've seen it in email after email. Don't you see the number of cases? Don't you see how many cases? And what we have to get people to do, to remember, is to distinguish between cases and transmission, because cases reflect what's happening in the community. And so if you have higher cases in the community, you will have more cases in your schools. You still won't have a comparable number, but you'll have cases in your schools. And what you won't see, even with more cases, is transmission, because you're able to do these mitigations, which is why we said until we were able to work with the health department to ensure that 5th mitigation, we didn't want to go, and we wanted to delay, and that's why we delayed till February. And that's why tonight, when one of you asked the question, Mr. Brumman said, yes, we can do contact tracing, especially with you bringing in, starting with K through 6, and we'll build up as we go after that before we bring back the high school students. So again, it isn't a lack of attention to the evidence, and it isn't a lack of attention to the concerns and the anxiety, but it's also, you have to work past the fear and look at the evidence in front of you and then balance that against what we all know is right, which is that our kids need to be back with us. So I just wanted to make that kind of final statement, mostly in response to all of the feedback that we continue to get. But at this point, the board has made its decision, and we, as we communicated tonight, are prepared. We feel confident in the mitigations, and we are prepared to move forward with bringing our students back starting on February the 2nd. And we look forward to doing that. And of course, we'll continue to update the board as we move forward on how that's going.
Thank you. And again, if we can focus on the progress made, just since we were all here a week ago, or were we Zooming a week ago? But clearly there was a strong message, and the proactive engagement of our staff with the Department of Health and their own, they got the message, and so that's all I think to be thankful for and celebrated, knowing it's still and that we continue focused on that goal. If you could grant one more indulgence before we formally adjourn, the superintendent estimate of needs meeting next Tuesday. We wanted to firm up the time. It was the agenda planning. I think we said we'll throw out a 5 o'clock start time to get your input. So this is the chance. Does 5 o'clock work with everybody?
And so maybe just a quick reminder because I know Ms. Franklin's new, maybe has not been part of one of these. This is a fairly brief meeting. We go through the estimate of needs and present that. There is not generally a question and answer time then, because it's your first look at it. So we give it to you to take back. It's a between meetings meeting. And then the following meeting would be our first public hearing on the estimate of needs. But so it's usually takes about 30 minutes max, just for context as you're talking.
And the 5th is a Friday, not a Tuesday, so it's the 5th?
Oh, I'm sorry, I said the 2nd, next Tuesday.
Okay, and what time?
Well, we're throwing out
Oh.
5 o'clock, and if we get concurrence on that, we'll stick with that. And then the public too can, before their dinner hour, kind of, we were trying to think of that. They could. Okay, then we'll settle on 5 o'clock back here next Tuesday. And again, a reminder, that's not for questions or discussion, but it's a superintendent presentation to us. And then we'll have time to formulate our questions for the first meeting to follow. All right. Then, folks, this workshop is adjourned at 10:09.